So we are come to the last two sessions. I would like to tell once more that my only qualification to speak on medical missions is that we have been privileged to be taken by God through various experiences, and we are just witnessing to what we have seen and experienced in our lives and observations over many years. There are surely many better models than this, and maybe in other parts of India and South Asian region and other parts of the world. But I am talking about what we have seen and what we have experienced. Maybe not everything can be applied in other settings, but some learnings may be useful. So I would start this session by inviting you into the world of the poor. So at Mukunda, we made them our target community, the poor, the people who could not afford to go to nursing homes, who could not even go to government hospitals, and just left their diseases neglected. So this was published in the Christian Medical College's journal. A lady who had a 35 kilogram ovarian tumor. So when she first saw the tumor, they had gone to a doctor and he told, we can remove it. But they felt it would be too costly. They would have had to sell their house. So they waited for a few more months, and by then it had become bigger. The doctor said, I can still remove it, but I cannot promise a cure. And then the family decided that it is better to let her die, because if they spent all that they had, they probably would lose her as well as all their assets. It is a heart-wrenching decision, but that is what happens in the world of the poor. So this lady came to us because she was not dying, and she was moaning and groaning and just sitting in that position because she could not lie down. We were able to remove that tumor, but she developed post-surgical decompensation pulmonary edema, and then finally became all right and went home walking, but probably died later because the biopsy was ovarian cancer. Many of them come too late to be saved, and they die of easily treatable conditions. And they come with whatever they have in their hand. So this lady has just brought 4 eggs, and she has said, treat me with this because I don't have any cash. So I told you that when we went to Mukunda, the maternal mortality rate was about 500 in the district. But after many years of working there, we had only 500 deliveries a year. So we wondered why these people are not coming, even though we gave them free treatments and a lot of charity. So we visited a lot of communities. So all these years, we never had a community health department at Mukunda. All this was done during our free times on Sundays and after work. So we discovered that every tribe had local village midwives, and they conducted deliveries at home. And these women and men, there are men midwives too. So they stayed at home and helped with the work at home. They cut firewood and cooked food and stayed till the mother was all right. And they were paid a sari or a few hundred rupees in cash or a bag of rice. So to come to hospital was too much of a cultural shock. There was too much inconvenience and cost involved, and that is why nobody came. So we decided that the key to solve this problem, because so many people were dying in the community, was to engage with these village midwives. So we invited them for meetings and asked them their experience. So initially they said nobody died in our hands, but little by little all sorts of stories came out. It is really alarming when somebody dies in our hospitals of obstructed labor or bleeding, and how much more would it be in a village where nothing is possible to be done. So we told these midwives, when you have these sort of severe problems, please refer them to us. The other ones you conduct yourself. So they started coming to hospital with very neglected deliveries. And we told the parents of this lady had saved your life because she brought you in time. So they were referred, and the villagers had no other choice because their experts had referred to a higher center, to our hospital. And little by little, they realized that it wasn't that inconvenient. Costs were really not that much, and people started coming in large numbers. Within a year, we had 1,500 deliveries, and the next 2,500, then 3,500. So in a matter of 4 or 5 years, we had about 4,500 deliveries. So please look at your own hospitals. Why are people not coming? All the patients are walking around outside your campus, but something is written on your gates which is putting them off. Maybe there is something that says, if you have 10,000 rupees, you are welcome. Whatever it is, we need to put in the right message so that the poorest people will come and receive our services. So we also did a lot of observations on the people who are genuinely poor. So we all know that major healthcare expenditure is the commonest cause of destitution across the world, especially in India, where the investment in healthcare is only 1.7% of the GDP, which is lower than all the other South Asian countries. And whenever there is an unexpected bill, people sell vital assets. They sell their homes, their land, their bullocks, and or they borrow at very high interest rates. They pay 10% or 20% of the main amount as interest every month. So what happens to these people when they come home? How do you diagnose financial vulnerability? So I'm not talking about poverty. Poverty is a chronic state of being, where people don't have a proper house or electricity and things like that. But this is financial vulnerability, inability to pay a bill because the harvest is not due, some other expenditure has taken place, and so on. So these people, when they come to our hospitals, they keep asking about the bill. They have 5,000 rupees in hand, and the moment the bill comes to 4,500, they say, my mother is sick, and could you please discharge? When a patient is very sick, they say, please discharge, because I can't stay anymore. Because they're afraid that if the patient dies, the cost of taking the body home would be too much. They're not willing for any referral. Whatever you can, you please do. Beyond that, we can't go anywhere. And they have other interesting things. They come to the hospital and find that a meal for the day might be about 1,000 rupees, 100 rupees for one person. So on the first day, they buy 4 meals for 4 people. Then they realize that if they're going to stay for a week, that is too much to spend on food. So on the second day, they just buy 1 meal and share it among all the 4. On the third day, they just buy a packet of biscuits. So we have trained our nurses to observe these signs of financial distress and give them proactive charity before they ask for it, before they sell their assets. So this is the behavior of the not so poor, the middle class people. They demand attention because they think they are doing you a favor by coming to your hospital. They could have easily gone to some other place. They haggle over bills and estimates because there is nothing to be lost. If they get into the bad books of the hospital, they can always go somewhere else. They want private rooms and special facilities. Even though they can pay the final bill, they still ask for charity. And that is the behavior of the not so poor. So I already said that we can diagnose this state of a family and give them charity. We can write off their dues. Sometimes they have a lot of dignity and they do not want to accept charity. So they will say, keep it due, I will come and repay. But we have a practice in our hospital that at the end of every financial year, all the dues for the year are written off. And we communicate to the people that you need not pay that amount. Because we know that paying off the dues could also lead to destitution. And suppose somebody comes for a laparoscopy cholecystectomy and then they develop an unexpected complication, their entire bill is written off because that was not expected. So this is not something that happens very frequently. So to the hospital, it doesn't mean anything. It may be several lakhs of charity in addition. But to that patient, it makes a big difference. For elective procedures, we find out what they can pay without having to sell vital assets. And then we write on the chart, pay rupees 2,000, rest free. And we try to avoid delays so that all the investigations are done as outpatient and the number of inpatient days are kept as low as possible. And sometimes we find out that the patient has actually sold their home, a home that cost 50,000 to build, now valued at 75,000, but has been sold for 20,000 as a distress sale. So we send our staff to retrieve that land with our own money and give it back to that family. So this is again not something that is done in large numbers, but it sends the message that the hospital is not here to make a profit, but it really has concern and empathy for the poor people. So we also have developed a revised gold standard. So what do you mean by that? So we know that there are gold standard protocols for management of all sorts of diseases, and most of these have been developed in the Western world. Chronic medical diseases like diabetes and hypertension need lifelong management. But if you give them a recurring cost every month that is more than they can bear, they will definitely default. So that is the reason why people don't come to hospital. So is it possible to give a less expensive drug? Maybe something that was being practiced 5 years ago. It may not be as good as the latest one, may not be, but it is not also as costly as the latest one. And it is better than nothing. It's something that they can take for their lifetime. Radionuclide studies, MRI, all these are part of gold standard protocols. But if they are not available, they are also not realistic. We see a lot of gallstones. We do about 300 and odd cholecystectomies a year, and a lot of people come with common bile duct stones, choledocholysis, biliary injuries. So we have started doing biliary duodenal anastomosis, choledochoduodenostomy and hepaticoduodenostomy, which avoid other expensive procedures. We need to have multitasking staff. So all these years I was managing finance, my wife was managing maintenance, the nursing superintendent also looked after human resource. So we keep our establishment costs low so that more money is available to give charity to poor people. So buildings are kept simple, and we need to have a pro-poor branding so that large volumes of patients come to our hospital. So this is an article published by the Christian Medical Journal of India, and is one of the, just before we joined, and I was very impressed with it. And another article written by Dr. Mohammed Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize. So these also led to some of our strategies. So we need people to say, this hospital is for people like us. So which people? Our target people, the poor. They should say, this hospital is for people like us. So how do we do that? So at Mukunda, we decided, partly based on the two references I gave you, that we will have no private consultation. It is difficult for a poor man to stand in a long queue and see that there is a shorter queue where rich people pay more money and get to see the doctor of their choice. Whereas in Mukunda, very often the rich man is behind a poor man, waiting in the same queue and to be seen by the same doctor. We have no private rooms. The entire hospital has only general beds. So again, there is no difference between what a poor man experiences and what a rich man experiences. We have identified areas in the hospital where destitution can occur very quickly, and one of that is the intensive care units, and we have deliberately reduced the cost. So this is not based upon costing, but it is based upon proactive pricing. So we have put it at 500 rupees a day for all procedures, including ventilation inside the ICU. The patient only pays for drugs extra. And this is possible because we internally cross-subsidize it by income from other departments. For example, in Mukunda, we do more than 20,000 ultrasound scans, and the income in that department is very high, and that money can be used to subsidize the ICU. And charity is given fully, even including food and stay for those who need it, because that is why we exist. Nurse training is given so that everybody knows why we exist, who are those poor, so that they may be treated as special guests. We visit the homes of the poorest people and understand the world from their point of view. And this is reflected in the Bible. So Jesus said, this crowd has been listening to me for 3 days and they are hungry. Please give them something to eat, or they may faint on the way. So can we look at our poor people like that? This man has come with his wife and 2 children. Let them be like our family. We tell our nurses to tell in the ward, this is my family for today. These are the people who are my guests for today. And as I go and work in this ward, let me talk to them. Let me know their fears and let me try to solve their problems, or at the least to pray for them. And that we must be conscious of the needy among our crowd of people. So we see sometimes 500 or 600 patients in a day. A doctor who worked with us wrote about my wife during a Teachers' Day meeting that, Madam, I have learnt from you to know what the patient is not saying. So we need to develop that ability to learn to know what the patient is not saying, what is the distress that is not being verbalized. And we must be able to say, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And in this I mean not come to God, but to come to me, because there are many things I can take care of. And it is only those things that I cannot take care of that should be referred to a higher center. Can I not speak to them? Can I not give them charity if they are poor? Can I not solve their problems to the ability that has been given to me and my institution? So you may wonder, if you do all that, won't the hospital collapse? So this is the income distribution in a rural area. All the blue are the poor, and then there are the middle class and the small people who are rich. The rich go to big hospitals in faraway places. The middle class go to nursing homes, and the large number of poor people have nowhere to go. So all you need to do to fill your hospital full of patients is to be able to reach that large number at the base. And this is the competition. Everybody is fighting for the middle class, but there is nobody fighting for a share of the population who is your target population. You can corner that market. Your beds will be full, and because of volumes, the number of amount of money that actually goes to overhead becomes lesser and lesser for each patient that is treated. I already told that these are our statistics. In addition to that, the hospital has a nursing school with about 50 students, and a farm, and a school with 1,200 children. So to run all that, and we receive an income of 23 crore. So since there are people from several other countries, I have put the exchange rate into dollars, and you can convert it into your own currency. So $3 million is the income received in 1 year, in the last year, out of which we have been able to give 3.4 crore, 15% of the total expense as charity to poor people. Our establishment expenses, which is the amount spent on salaries and salary related items, is 30%. We have received local donations of only rupees 20 lakhs, and we have received foreign donations of probably an equivalent amount, and together these account for only 2% of the total income. But in spite of that, we have an income over expenditure of 3.5 crore, and we have spent 2 crore of that for capital expenses. So you can see that this model is financially sustainable, and it should work in most places where there is a mix of population, some poor and some who can afford. People often say that if you are aiming at the poor, then your quality will also be poor. So in 2018, we applied for accreditation to the Indian National Accreditation Board for Hospitals and Healthcare Institutions, and we were given entry-level accreditation. And this year it has been renewed for 2 more years. So this is not something that we have declared. It is something that somebody has come and examined and have compared to their standards, and they have said that we are good quality. In 2019, we invited a team of researchers from the Wharton School of Business to come to Mukunda, and they did an impact assessment of the previous 25 years, and that is their report. And a few months ago, this was published in a peer-reviewed journal with internal insights from me and my wife, and written by the lead researcher. I will give you the reference for this, and you can understand their external business point of view analysis of what has happened at Mukunda. So how does all this affect the healthcare? So in those years of rapid growth in maternal and infant statistics at Mukunda, we can see that the MMR and IMR have decreased. We are not the only reason for that, because there are other facilities. But we were the only ones which rapidly upscaled our statistics. And we are the first 2 hospitals, Mukunda and Karimganj, are the ones in our district. Silchar Medical College is 100 kilometers away in another district, but our statistics was almost half of theirs. So a lot of highly committed manpower is required for success in such a model. So I have been going around talking about this model in many places in India, in Indonesia, in Africa. In 2016, I was invited as a clinical mentor to the Global Surgical Hackathon in Uganda, and that was organized by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Massachusetts General Hospital, and the Harvard Business School. And I feel that in spite of presenting a model that works well, there are good reasons why people hesitate to take it up. One of the things is that when their facilities are not poor, people think it is professionally not up to their mark, up to their expectation. The first cesarean at Mukunda was done when a patient had come with obstructed labor, and we had referred her to another hospital because there was no electricity and no autoclave. But at night we found that this lady had not gone anywhere, and they were only planning to take her home to die if we did not operate. So the surgery was done at night without electricity, using kerosene lanterns and under local anesthesia, with the linen autoclave 10 years ago by missionaries and still inside their pack. So that is how the work has started. Today we have advanced facilities, but I would like to say that getting good results in poor facilities, that is a professional challenge, and it will test us to the maximum, and it will also put our trust in God and not in ourselves. Innovation is very important to get good quality in resource poor settings. We should look beyond protocols. We should look beyond gold standards and see what works in our place. The more pioneering the area, the more the capacity to transform, because volumes are so large. The greatest difficulty is that the pace of development is slow. And for many years, as I had mentioned, we lived without electricity and water. So people do not want to put up with these sort of inconveniences. Workloads are high. People do not want to work so much. And therefore, many good ideas are not adopted. But are we not called to even greater challenges? Why would we not face those temporary and trivial inconveniences for greater rewards in heaven? That is a challenge that is before us. I'm sure that in other countries, things are much worse. I went and visited 2 mission hospitals in Africa, which were much worse than Mukunda was ever at any stage. So the challenges there are even greater than what we face in our region. So poor-centric strategies bring large volumes. They increase efficiency. They make our institution self-sufficient and viable. And they target underprivileged populations who do not have other options, and thus they bring transformation. They start the process of including the excluded, those who are falling through the gaps, and they will improve health indicators because they include those who are left out. And we have found at our hospital that high quality can still be provided at an affordable cost, and we can have the best of everything. So the question was, do we need external support? So let us make our business plan. These are the things that are needed, and this is the income we have. Can we raise more money? Can we reduce our expenses? And if both are not possible, can we seek external support? What are the rules of the land concerning external support? In India, it is now becoming difficult to get external support from outside the country, but other opportunities are opening up. A social stock exchange has been announced. So we need to make our external support broad-based, not all eggs in one basket. Local donors, corporates and foundations, foreign donors and government. But it takes a very long time to establish our credibility. At Mukunda, it is only in the last year or so that we have started receiving support from outside. So this year, we are going to receive a large grant from the Northeastern Council, and we started this process of applying to them in 2014. And this year, we will receive a large grant, which includes CT scan and other critical equipment. So this is something that happened yesterday. So we have applied to one foundation, and they have started helping us. And they have introduced us to the Sachin Tendulkar Foundation in Bombay, and they have donated several equipment, including a high-frequency oscillating ventilation machine for congenital diaphragmatic hernia and other similar conditions, which would have been too expensive for us to buy. And a few years ago, we received a large grant from this foundation in the Netherlands. So this is run by a family, a philanthropic family, and they had a vision of starting a nurse missionary program somewhere in the world. And we applied for that, and we were selected. So a college of nursing is coming up with funds given by this foundation. So we need to ask this question: does the external donor own our vision? So when we got the government grant, we asked them, what do we need to do in return? So they said, please treat the poor. And that is what we have been doing. And if that is the only condition, we are happy to accept the grant. The foundation in Netherlands, they told us, we want you to train nurse missionaries. And that is why we started our nurse training program. So there is nothing that has been asked that we are not already doing. And it is not going to compromise any of our core values. But sometimes the donors ask us to change our vision. In '93, when we joined this hospital, an agreement had already been made with an entity which had given some funds, and their expectation was that we would stop all general medical work and convert Mukunda into a purely leprosy hospital. So at that point in time, the prevalence rate of leprosy in the Northeast was very low. In our area, already at the point of elimination. So we argued with them that when people are dying of maternal and infant complications, the priority was not in leprosy. And we were already doing leprosy work. But we had a lot of difficulties with them. But over the next 2 years, we were able to convince them, and they stopped the funding, and we were able to get out of that partnership. So please look into the details when we apply, details when we receive funds. It is not the funds that matter, but it is the terms of the partnership which will make us fruitful. What are the positive and negative impacts of this partnership? Have we done a cost versus benefit analysis? Have we done a risk versus benefit analysis? How does this partnership affect the people we have been called to serve, the poor people who come to us in large numbers? Are they going to be excluded? If that is so, then this partnership is not good for us, even though it may look very attractive. Is this donation coming from an individual, or is it the institution's vision to partnership with us? So we need to look at their vision statement. That is called due diligence. You call people who have been funded by this donor earlier and ask them, what is your experience with this donor? You find out and do some research on why these people exist, what they have been doing all these years. And then you decide whether to take a donation. It is better to live without electricity and water than to take an inappropriate donation from a donor. Do we face competition? And I'm sure many of our hospitals face competition. So some years ago, I went for a surgical conference at the nearest large town, Silchar, 100 kilometers from our hospital. And there were many surgeons there. When they saw me, they stopped talking. And then I introduced myself, and they said, we know who you are. You are taking away our bread and butter. So I asked them, what exactly do you mean? So they said, you are taking away all our cholecystectomies. So I told them that is not true. In my hospital, in our hospital, Mukunda, there are no private rooms. And in all your hospitals, you have only private rooms. The people who come to you are the people who do not wish to be operated in Mukunda. And if you have people who cannot pay the bill, please send them to us. Now we are best friends. They refer to us and we refer to them, and there is no competition. So why should we compete when we have people whom nobody else wants? Why should we compete when we treat people whom nobody wants? When we are specializing in conditions like leprosy, mental health, palliative care, rehabilitation, and the competition does not see any profit in these areas, why should we not focus on those places? Let us also examine what are the regulatory requirements to run a hospital in our country. In 2008, we received a notice from the government of Assam that Mukunda will be closed in 15 days for failure to meet the requirements of the Assam Nursing Establishments Registration and Regulation Act. We did not even know that there was such an act, and we found that there were 19 requirements which we did not meet. Over the next few years, we had to completely suspend our strategic plan to put efforts into meeting each of these requirements. Today, we meet all those requirements and exceed them. And there are optional standards today, like quality requirements, which may not be mandatory, but in a few years, they may be. Why not work towards those standards today and not wait till they become mandatory? So we learned a painful lesson that we need to keep watch and what is happening in our states, in our countries, in the world at large, and constantly change our plans so that we keep abreast of the demands and requirements that are going to be put into our institutions. Otherwise, we may not be able to function and our hospitals could be closed. So I would like to stop with this and ask these questions. I have looked at only two numbers. What is your hospital or our hospital's bed occupancy rate? So if you have 100 beds and the bed occupancy rate as at Mukunda is close to 100, that reflects community ownership of your services. We have to plan to make it 150. Mukunda today has 200 beds, and we hope to have it raised to 300. And I am sure that when it is 300, our bed occupancy rate will again be full, 100%. But if it is only 20%, we need to ask ourselves, what is stopping people from coming to us? What is that message that is on the gate outside? What is it that people are afraid of when they consider coming to our hospital? When we are hungry and we are walking in the streets of a major city, we do not go and have food in a 5-star hotel. We think this place is too expensive for us. We will go there maybe once a year, once in my lifetime for some major function, but it is not something I will go every day. In the same way, people walking outside our roads, the gates of our hospitals, are not entering us for some reason. So let us introspect and ask what is keeping our bed occupancy rate low. The second question I want to ask, what is our donor dependency ratio? If I need 10 crore rupees and 40% of that is coming from external support, what will happen if it stops one day? Sometimes some of our hospitals need to be donor dependent. I was listening to stories from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from South Sudan, and in desperate places where the entire population is poor. And in those places, we cannot hope to earn incomes from people who can afford to do so. But in every other place, we need to work out ways. When I joined this hospital, I had no idea about finance, no idea about law, no idea about administration. But it is God who gives us wisdom. He is the source of all wisdom, strength, and encouragement. And He will lead you and help you to plan wisely so that your work is sustainable. The third question, is our hospital sustainable? Is it affordable to the target population and yet providing high quality service? If not, let us go into the reasons why. Why is it not sustainable? Are our costs too much? Are we too heavy in our staff numbers? And why are the people not coming to us? Is it something else that is putting them off? The way we treat them, is it not good to them? And why is our quality poor? What needs to be done to improve it? In the last few years, we have many new staff who have come and highly motivated and committed, who have put into practice many more new quality initiatives. And what changes should be made to optimize our financial planning? It is difficult when people have to have low salaries. Some nurses and doctors told us that the salary is too low. So when I visited their homes, I realized that both the parents are not working. Maybe one of them is dead, the other is handicapped, and they are the eldest of 8 children, and the other 7 children are still in college, and of those 3 have dropped out because there is no money. So all the hope for this family was that this one person who completed his MBBS will solve all their financial problems. So what can you tell them? when the salary that you are offering them is only a fraction of what they will get in government service. It is a sacrifice that we need to bear. It is not only a sacrifice that we personally have to bear, but our children have to bear, our parents have to bear, our family has to bear, the community has to bear. So that is the cost of working, and there is no easy solution. But it is only the people with that passion who will still come to you, having counted the costs. For example, this observation that somebody is sharing food or not eating, it is not something that a rich man will do, because it causes pain. So people will not, you can't fake it. So these are observations which cannot be faked. People may come with a bad dress, they may take off all the jewelry and all that, but how many days will you go without food? So I think we have developed that, and I think it is fairly, although we have not published it, how much to give, we need to talk to them. So usually we go and ask them, how much money do you have? If the bill is like 70,000 rupees, we may send somebody to the village just to check. And we have community leaders, and we can ask them, in your village, in your community, there is a lady like this who has come to our hospital, and she says that she is poor. What do you say? So it is not very difficult to find out those who are really poor. And we do not have a budget for charity. We keep on giving as much as required and trust God to balance the budget. And all these years, He has given us more than what we have given. I think there are a lot of hospitals which have done well, but within their constraints. So if you look at Africa, there are hospitals which have received a good amount of money, and with that they have done well. And there are organizations like MSF and Red Cross which are extremely efficient. So although many of their models are short-term projects, not running a long permanent hospital, they have used their facilities very wisely. In Tamil Nadu, I told you I worked at Christian Fellowship Hospital. So one of their principles is that they will not receive any outside grants, no foreign funds. So they have managed to develop a very comprehensive 300-bed hospital, seeing I think 400,000 patients a year, and still being self-sufficient. So I don't think that this Mukunda model is an answer to everybody's question. Each of us have to develop our own. And I cannot confidently comment about other models without knowing all the details or having actually worked there. I can only say confidently about what we have been through. What we really need is only to have one or two people minimum to stay long term. The rest can come and go. So if you need 20 doctors and 4 people leave every year, as long as 4 more are coming in, there's no problem. And in those 2 years, they will learn many things which they will never forget in the rest of their lives. They have given 2 years of their life to the mission field. Do we need large numbers of people to work 30 years? The larger that number, I think, the greater the number of projects that can be started and sick hospitals revived. But that fraction is going to be very small. It is that experience across the world. We went for a missions conference in the USA where they had the same problem. People in Africa, China, and everywhere else, very small numbers stay long term. And that is the story of medical missions all these years. So, and we need to live with that. But usually the corruption is because we ask for a license which we are not eligible for. So you want for a license, you don't have land documents. So what do? Or the license takes 6 months, but you want it tomorrow. So these are unreasonable. I think we cannot do such things. But suppose you have everything in your hand and you are waited enough, and then you still don't get what you want. There are ways out. So in 1997, we applied for a load sanction increase from the Assam State Electricity Board. 5 years later, we still had not got it. And equipment we have received rusting in the buildings. So I just read up what to do. What does the government say? How do you give a grievance? So I read that there is a thing called the State Vigilance Commission and the Central Vigilance Commission. So I wrote a letter to the State Vigilance Commission and said, this is our experience. We have come from Tamil Nadu. We are working here for these poor people. This is the date on which we filed our application, and after such a long time we have not received. And people are dying because these equipment could not be installed. So I was extremely surprised that within about a week, an entire team had landed up in our hospital. So they said, we never receive letters like this. You are the only fellow who has written. So they immediately transferred that engineer to a remote militant infested part of Assam. And within 1 week, we got our license, our application granted. But the great thing was that after that, whenever we went to a government hospital, government office, people would say, the Mukunda people have come, you better be careful, otherwise you will also get transferred. So it is not that we have no options. I think number one, make sure all your documents are in order. Second, make sure that you have applied long ahead so that you will given enough time to get it, because there is a long process. And then if still there is unreasonable delay, then there are official ways out. You should decide where you want to go, what you want to do, and look for the right places. So like our hospital can still take more junior doctors. We can take more consultants. And across India, I'm sure across South Asia, there will be places which will be very happy to have new doctors join them. There are some hospitals which specialize in leprosy. There are other hospitals specialized on eye care or on community-based rehabilitation. So if these are your interests, you can search them out. It's very easy now because of Google and the internet. I had the privilege of working for 1 month at the Patan Hospital in Kathmandu, and in 1995. I also visited Bangladesh. So I know each of these places is very different, and you will find the right place which fits you.